We have several heroic tales, several epic tales. It includes, in addition to epics and myths, and those are the two aspects of the Sumerian literary genre that I particularly specialized on.
We tell ourselves that writing began as a tidy ledger, a way to count barley, tally bricks, name kings. But some discoveries don't add answers. They ask questions that keep asking you back. For Samuel Noah Kramer, the patient, careful decoder of the world's first civilization, the question started as a faint echo in a silent room. Picture him alone in a cool archive, the air dusty with centuries, reed stylus marks frozen in clay. He had given his life to Sumer, cities that rose out of mud and willpower, laws that bound strangers, myths that stitched the sky to the ground. To his peers, Sumer was the birthplace of sense, calendars, contracts, canon. To him, late in life, it started to look like something else, like a machine. It began with a mismatch so small it felt impolite to mention. A ritual line in a temple hymn surfaced again in a worker's ration tablet. A blessing for a goddess turned up inside a warehouse inventory. A builder's memorandum reached for the same verbs as a purification prayer. At first, he blamed sloppy scribes, familiar habits, cultural static. But the duplications didn't scatter randomly, they clustered. Specific numbers, 3, 7, 12, 60, kept reappearing in places they didn't need to be. The same formulas, the same turns of phrase, pulsed across genres that ought to have been strangers. Kramer wrote in his notebook, not overlap, alignment. What if the Sumerians hadn't just recorded their world, but tuned it, set daily life to a cosmic key, and kept it there with repetition? He stopped calling them phrases and started calling them hooks, because once he noticed them, they caught everywhere. Hymns, audits, decrees, receipts. The archive felt less like a library and more like circuitry. Lines connecting lines, signals looping, a system humming over millennia. He rarely said this aloud. He feared sounding mystical, but those who sat with him after lectures remember the new hush in his voice, the way he handled a tablet not like data, but like a device. They didn't describe the gods, he murmured once. They constructed them. To construct is to specify is to limit, and to limit is to control. If sacred language colonized accounting, if arithmetic walked in ritual clothing, then the invention wasn't merely writing. It was a way to make belief unavoidable. The line that kept returning lived in both the temple and the yard, to raise the pure mountain, to bind heaven and earth. In a hymn, it crowned the moon god. In a ledger, it captioned bricks. Why would a builder borrow the vocabulary of the sky? Because the wall wasn't just a wall, because the act was the doctrine. Once Kramer mapped enough tablets by time and city, the pattern refused to let go. Dynasties burned, rivers shifted, the words stayed. It was as if the scribes had built a bridge between myth and math, and then marched the whole country across. The insight left his study and met him in the sun. He went to Ur and stood at the foot of its great terrace mountain, the ziggurat the desert could not erase. If a tablet is a sentence, the ziggurat is a paragraph you climb. Every terrace was proportioned with the same numbers that laced the hymns. Every stair rose in the rhythm of prayers. The foundation's geometry mirrored the star paths above it, and the topmost shrine completed the thought. Later, in the temple records, he found the verbs again. To purify, to ascend, to bind. Priests used them, builders used them, accountants used them. The labor and the liturgy had been written to the same template. Architecture as syntax, worship as logistics as worship. He sketched it in the margins. Clay text, arrow stone, text, arrow, human text. You read the city with your feet. You maintained the cosmos with your hands. But if the ziggurat was the body of the system, who kept its pulse steady? Behind kings and priests stood the quiet class that did not conquer, did not bless, did not command, yet made all three endure. The scribes. Children swallowed by tablet schools learned to copy lists until the lists copied them. 1 hour, a hymn to Inanna. Next hour, a delivery of malt. Then omen series, then brick measures, then case law. The boundaries blurred by design. In this script, a star sign could be a god sign, could be an account sign, meaning, braided meaning. Power works best when it looks like reading. The novice sees symbols, the initiate sees switches. Which formula opens a lawsuit? Which ending seals a treaty? Which number consecrates a doorway? The scribes knew. They chose what entered clay, and thus what left memory. Dynasties thought they ruled. Scribes made the rules readable. And when a rule is what you read each morning, the rule is what you are. Kramer's notebooks began to shift. Less grammar, more pattern, less translation, more topology. He drew constellations of words: pure, measure, bind, ascend. He circled numbers: 3, 7, 12, 60. Each a rung, a turning, a unit of consent. On some nights he heard the rhythm as if it were audible, the chant that never stops chanting. A priest intones 7 names, a clerk tallies 60 jars, a mason lays 12 courses. Different acts, same sentence. Repeat until the city believes. He tested the thought against history's blunt interruptions. Floods rose, kings vanished, foreign tongues broke over Sumer like surf. And still, in the debris of new dynasties, the same hooks gleamed. The words had outlived their first speakers. The program continued to run. He began calling it, in private, the Sumerian Code. Not a cipher to crack, but a cycle to keep. A logic that taught itself by repetition and protected itself by beauty. Beauty is the part no one suspects. The code wore symmetry like a crown. A ratio in the brickwork, a cadence in the line, a calendar that turned like a bronze gear. You didn't have to agree with the doctrine to be held by its design. The curve carried you. Kramer grew wary of applause. He had spent a life being thanked for bringing the Sumerians to life. But the life he was now describing felt less like a museum reanimation and more like a living current we still stand in. He would look up from a tablet and see his own world reflected. Forms to complete, procedures to recite, words that confer reality once stamped in the right place. The medium changes, the obedience remains. In the quiet of his study, he rehearsed a sentence he never quite published. The first writing was not history, it was maintenance. Every day the system needed tending, a liturgy of lists. You don't keep a cosmos coherent by arguing it, you keep it by reciting it. 7 lambs, 12 priests, 60 loaves, 3 turns of the season, 3 signatures on the decree. The numbers do not convince, they compel. He could show you how. Open a basket of tablets from Lagash, and you'll see a hymn's opening used as a contract's preface. Not piety slipped into paperwork by accident, but a deliberate seam, the sacred sewn to the civic so often and so tightly that the two become one cloth. In the same stack, an omen series, stars like fish in the sky, stands beside a ration tablet, fish-like stars in a ledger. Cross-pollination becomes cross-binding. No sphere without the other's scent. Every sphere under the same sky. When he traveled back to the ruins, the thought followed him like a shadow. At Nippur, the sanctuary city of scribes, he stood by a wall where old repairs cut new lines through older ones, layers of faith compressing into a single face of stone. He thought of schoolrooms where children learned that a wedge is a sound, is a number, is a law. He imagined the moment a novice discovered that one sign could open both a psalm and a lawsuit. The thrill, the responsibility, the temptation. In a letter he never sent, he wrote, "To rule the mind, rule the symbols." That line feels cruel, but he didn't mean it as accusation. He felt awe and dread braided together, like the double helix of a story that is both cradle and cage. The code, as he saw it, was not evil. It was effective. It allowed hundreds of thousands of strangers to share a time, a tax, a god, a goal. It made bread arrive on predictable days and seasons recur on purpose. It made a city possible. It also made descent difficult. He traced the shape of that difficulty in a myth he had translated as a younger man, the descent of Inanna. A goddess who passes through gates, shedding ornaments, surrendering privilege, entering the dead's domain to return with a power she cannot fully control. He now read it as an allegory for literacy itself. To enter the kingdom of signs is to shed spontaneity, to be bound by forms, and yet to come back able to move the earth. The cost is invisible until you try to flee. Not all his metaphors were soft-edged. Sometimes his private notes cut like bronze. They built stone computers, he wrote after one difficult day at Ur. You input devotion, the output is order. He wasn't talking about machines of gears and water. He meant devices of ritual and ratio. He meant a staircase that processed people into participants, a festival calendar that compiled the city into a chorus. He meant a structure where every step was a syllable in a sentence that ended, always, with agreement. Agreement is civilization's miracle, but also its mirage. He saw that the Sumerians had found a way to make agreement feel like air, unquestioned because it is everywhere. Put the god's name at the top of the tablet, place the king's titles beneath, follow with numbers no one challenges because the numbers are sacred, and the rest writes itself. You can disagree with a man. It is harder to disagree with the sky. When he returned to Philadelphia, the archive greeted him like a tide. Boxes of fragments, each fragment a shore. He handled them differently now. These were not merely records. They were instructions still humming, faintly warm with habit. He began assembling a private anthology. Not the greatest hits of Sumerian literature, but the phrases that stitched the code, the repeating verbs, purify, bind, ascend. The repeating nouns, measure, foundation, gate. The numbers with crowns, 3, 7, 12, 60. He laid them in rows like tiles. They clicked. The clicking frightened him. Something that fits this well might fit too well. He thought of the times the code had swallowed rivals. Conquerors come and rename the gods. The grammar swallows their names and keeps the structure. Kings fall, the calendar stays. Foreign merchants arrive, the measures absorb them. Over centuries, Sumerian becomes Akkadian, becomes Babylonian. But the hooks keep hooking, the numbers keep turning, the ziggurats keep rising like punctuation in the landscape. The syntax survives translation. He wondered how far the survival ran. If you peel back the gold leaf from the laws you respect, the charters you trust, would you find an old clay color beneath? When you say official record, do you feel a ghost of a seal? When you accept a number because it is a number, does the base 60 flicker in the corner of your eye? He didn't say this out loud, but sometimes his students caught him staring at a modern document like it was an artifact, watching the code wear a new costume and still be itself. There is a point in every scholar's life when the thing you study starts studying you back. For Kramer, the turning came with a dream he recorded in a thin, tight hand. He dreamt of a tablet that wrote itself, lines appearing as if dictated from a room without walls. The text described a city that reassembled each dawn, every brick laying itself according to the measures, every citizen standing in the queue their ancestors had rehearsed. In the margin he wrote, "Repetition is mercy when the world is chaos. Repetition is prison when the world is changing." He began to speak more softly about discovery and more urgently about consequence. "The first writers did not describe reality," he wrote in one of his last notes. "They manufactured it." He underlined manufactured twice, not because he despised them for it, but because he recognized the audacity. To make reality sound like memory, that is a dangerous gift. The slow burn of his revelation led him back to the beginning. The schoolroom. The place where a child learns that a mark can summon a meaning, and that a meaning can summon a world. He imagined the teacher's reed in the child's hand, guiding the wedge, insisting on the angle, the sequence. He imagined the child feeling the grammar harden into habit. That is how the code moves, not with thunder, but with repetition, gently enough to seem like care. He never accused the scribes. He called them custodians of the invisible. Without them, the great experiment would have collapsed into dust and rumor. With them, it endured long enough to become everyone's inheritance. But he wanted us to see them clearly, not as cloistered clerks, but as engineers of consent. They calibrated the meters by which the city measured itself. They aligned the calendar with the sky and the law with the calendar. They chose which failures vanished from the record and which victories calcified into truth. They set the font and the frame of reality. When he returned once more to Ur's terraces, he climbed slowly, a man walking up through syntax. Each landing had a feeling, the ground's hush, the middle's wind, the top's thin light. He paused and placed his palm on the stone. The heat of the day had gone into it. The stone returned the warmth, as if answering a question not asked aloud. He understood then what made the code unkillable. It worked with human bodies. It offered rhythm to tired hands, certainty to anxious minds, meaning to the long, empty hours. The hook was usefulness. The beauty was bonus. And yet, there was the other side, the shadow each pillar throws. If the code can manufacture order, it can also manufacture silence. If the same phrases legislate the sky and the street, where does dissent speak from? Whose wedge writes the word otherwise? Kramer did not have an answer that made him comfortable. He only had the warning that sat under his tongue like a smooth stone. Beware the sentence that cannot be interrupted. He began, in his last lectures, to talk about interruption as a virtue, about the necessity of marginalia, notes that smuggle questions into settled paragraphs. He told stories of tablets overwritten, scraped, and reinscribed, palimpsests where you can see the earlier hand fighting through the later one, like a plant through concrete. He smiled when he described them, as if these damaged texts were the most alive, because they confessed the struggle the pristine ones concealed. In the final season of his life, the sentence that wouldn't let go claimed him fully. He heard it in hospital corridors, in the rustle of paper gowns, in the beeping that measures a heart and decides its status by numbers. The code has had many forms. It never lost its faith in counting. He didn't reject the machines. He thanked them for their competence. But he recognized the old habit, the ancient agreement, the way a measured world comforts even as it confines. "Before I die, please listen," he wrote on a page that carried nothing else. No citation, no gloss, just that. Then, below it, in letters pressed harder than his hand could usually manage, the story becomes the structure. The structure becomes the world. He meant it as a map back to the beginning. If you want to change the world, do not begin with the walls. Begin with the words. The Sumerians knew this before anyone else. Write the ladder, and the city will climb it. There is a mercy in this thought. If writing manufactured worlds, writing can manufacture better ones. The code is not a curse, it is a capacity. We can recognize the hooks without surrendering to them. We can honor the scribes and still ask for new sentences. We can climb the old ziggurat and still sketch a different skyline. Kramer did not live to see his warning given 1,000 new skins. He died before the screen replaced the tablet on most desks, before the tapping replaced the wedge. But he would have recognized the continuity. He would have seen the enunciation screens, the prompts we obey because they look official, the boxes we tick because the process is holy. He would have asked gently who wrote them. He would have underlined once more the most uncomfortable question the tablets ever taught him to ask. Who gets to say what counts? In the end, his legacy is not a scandal or a secret. It is a way of seeing. The Sumerians did not invent civilization by accident. They invented it with a syntax. Their impossible pillars were not stones stacked against the sky, but ideas stacked within the mind, each one bearing the weight of the next. Pillars of number, pillars of name, pillars of narrative that held up the horizon and said, "This is the world. Walk carefully." And we do. We walk carefully. We carry forms. We accept calendars. We recite. When the day ends and the light lies low on the desk, we set the stylus down, whatever form our stylus takes. And we ask the question that haunted a quiet scholar in a room of clay. Are we reading the world, or is the world reading us? If this made you look twice at what you sign, what you say, what you believe when the symbol tells you it's true, then don't let the question fade. There are more tablets left to turn, more hooks to notice, more codes to unspool. Stay, listen, question. And if this slow-burning journey through the oldest operating system in history resonated, share it, subscribe, and join me for the next descent into the rooms beneath our rooms, where stories become structures, and structures become the world we think we chose.